Okay, we're live on YouTube. I'll go ahead and send this to our WhatsApp groups. Okay, 7:30. Mataji, would you like to begin?
Yes. Hare Krishna, everyone over there. I'm so happy to be here in our series of Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1. Today we will be covering Canto 1, Chapter 3. So last week we covered Chapter 2, Divinity and Divine Service. And it was a very interesting chapter where Sutha Goswami answers 4 of the 6 questions that the sages had asked. And specifically the first 2 questions was elaborately discussed in this chapter, in the last chapter. Namely, the sages had asked, what is the ultimate good for all people and what is the essence of all scriptures? So Sutha Goswami had elaborately discussed the answer to this question and discussed the importance of devotional service. And then he took us through the process of bhakti, which he recommended it should be done in a way which is unmotivated and uninterrupted. And we heard about the 9 stages of bhakti. And then we heard about who this bhakti should be performed for. Not for the demigods, but for the Lord himself. For Vishnu, who is the predominator of bhakti. And then Sutha Goswami explained that Vasudeva is actually the goal of all yagya, jnana, tapasya, and one should worship Vishnu, yet it is Vasudeva who is the supreme. But it was not quite completely clear as to who is Bhagavan. Bhagavan means the possessor of all opulence. And this is how this chapter, 3rd chapter, begins, which is called, this Krishna is the source of all incarnations. So, I will begin with the invocation and also the chanting of the first shloka and the translation, so we can invoke auspiciousness. And then I will explain and take you through this PowerPoint step by step to explain what is this chapter, the essence of this chapter. So basically, it will be an overview of the chapter, and then Sri Radhika Mataji will take you through the guidebook with all the major themes and activities in the guidebook, and then we will open it for questions. So chant along with me. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So text 1. Sutha vacha jagrehe porisham rupam Bhagavan mahad adhibi sambhutam sodisha kalam adau loka srikshaya. Sutha said, In the beginning of the creation, the Lord first expanded himself in the universal form of the Purusha incarnation and manifested all the ingredients for the material creation. And thus, at first, there was a creation of the 16 principles of material action. This was for the purpose of creating the material universes. So this first verse is actually a very important verse. Why? Because it gives a hint as to who Bhagavan actually is. Just simply a hint. And how does it do it? It says that Bhagavan, he accepts Purusha Rupam, which means the form of the Purushas, and which are known as the three Purusha avatars. But he still doesn't explain who Bhagavan is. He's saying that the Lord, Bhagavan, he's accepting these three Purusha incarnations for the purpose of creation. But he's not explaining as yet who that Bhagavan is. So the next slide. So, then further in the text verses following that, then Krishna, there's more explanation of the Purusha avatars. Okay, now in the last chapter we heard Sutha Goswami answers that question, which was actually the fourth question. Actually, it was the fourth question. The third question was, for what purpose does Krishna appear in the womb of Devaki and Vasudeva? Right? And the fourth one, there was the Purusha incarnations. So we saw that Sutha Goswami mentions a bit about that. Here it is further elaborated. And the reason why here in this a few texts,
Hare Krishna, Mataji. Can't hear you. Looks like Garbuda Mataji dropped off the call. I'm sure she'll be back soon. Just hold on a few minutes. Sorry, I'm just trying to get Mataji back online. Okay, you're back, Mataji. There you are.
Okay.
Should I start the screen share again?
Yes.
All right. Sorry, we'll pick up from slide 2, everyone.
Oops, good point. Yeah. Hare Krishna. Yes, I think what happened is my internet went out, and so we had a little problem here. Sorry, and we are back here. Sometimes there's internet issues here, unfortunately. So, so we'll carry on where we left off. So I was talking about verse 1, which explains about the Purusha incarnations, and the necessity of explaining the Purusha incarnations is that that they have to be because they are the source of all the Leela incarnations of the Lord, and that was the fifth question for for Sutha Goswami. So now we're going to talk about how the reason of this creation that Krishna, why Krishna actually creates this material world. And the reason which is mentioned is ahankar, or false ego, which is really the reason of creation. Krishna is the only enjoyer and we are the only enjoyed. Our services are meant to be an offering to the Lord. The purpose, just like the purpose of the hand is to serve the body. So when we serve Krishna, we get nourishment and we get happiness. So this process of creation gives us another chance. It gives the conditioned souls another chance to unite with Krishna. Just a minute. To unite with Krishna. And so the child, the conditioned soul is given this chance, just like a child, he plays with his toys for some time and cooking utensils for some time, and he allows the living entity in the mature world to enjoy independently from him for some time. And then when he's frustrated in his attempt, he then turns towards him. So, so the Lord in this transcendental Purusha incarnation, which is a transcendental form, he impregnates this material energy with the living entities. And how does he do that? He simply glances over it. He's the catalyst that sets the creation in motion. Now, this point is really discussed by Srila Prabhupada very deeply, very strongly, because he wants to make the point that ultimately is, matter comes from life, and life does not come from matter. In other words, the creation, unlike, to refute the modern theories, he wants to make a point that creation does not happen by chance. Krishna, a living force, which is the Supreme Lord, has to, when he glances at that, then Prakriti acts. Then Prakriti is able to deliver. So Krishna is known, as the most potent being. Due to the interactions with eternal time, with time, Mahat Tattva, he becomes manifest. And what is this Mahat Tattva? It's actually a shadow of pure consciousness. It's the germinating place for all creation. And it can be understood as the medium between spiritual and material universes. I'm not going to go very deeply into this subject matter because it's going to actually be discussed at great length in Canto 2 as well as Canto 3, 6th chapter. And so we'll just barely cover it here. But the point here is that, it begins with the glance of Vishnu, and the first manifestation is the Mahat Tattva, which is like a total material energy. And from that comes the false ego, Ahankar, which is the reason. Remember, I said how it's the reason of this creation. And it's the first material element to appear. And then it manifests again manifests in three modes of nature: the goodness, passion, and ignorance. And from this false ego, we have the intellect and the mind. Like we say, the subtle body is the ego, intelligence, and the mind, right? So these make up the mental aspect of the individual soul. So what we have to note is that creation begins from the very subtle to the gross, whereas destruction goes the other way. that we're going to hear much, much later. Okay, so so in this way, these mental faculties, they are resting on these material elements, and these start developing from the most subtle to the gross, which means ether, air, fire, water, and earth. So earth is considered the most gross, right? So all this is elaborately discussed in the Sankhya philosophy of Kapila Muni in his teachings to his mother Devahuti. Later on, we can understand this further. But for right now, we should just understand that matter, all material creation happened not by chance, but by the glance of Vishnu. How wonderful he is, how great he is, and this is just these Purusha avatars are just a very small portion of the portion of the Lord. So, and of course, when the Lord first appears, he expands into Balaram and goes on till, we have the 3 Purusha incarnations. It just gives us the immensity of this whole process. It's so wonderful. Krishna is very, very, that's why he's known as Bhagavan. He's really the master of all opulences. And but we have to also note and understand that how Srimad Bhagavatam, it actually emphasizes the importance of knowledge of God. This is not the emphasis of Srimad Bhagavatam. What the emphasis of Srimad Bhagavatam, what is getting us to, is the source of the knowledge. And it assigns an inferior role to the Lord's external energy, which is called Maya or matter. Okay. Unfortunately, the conditioned souls are so much attracted by these mechanical workings of this material world, But the Vaishnava devotee is not so attracted. He simply understands this to glorify his Lord, right? To glorify his Lord. Because every aspect of the Lord's personality is just so wonderful. And if somebody loves somebody, you like everything about that person, right? So in that sense, the devotees, the pure devotees, they relish this, this account. But really, the purpose of Bhagavatam is actually to understand who Krishna is, who Krishna is. So the bhakta or devotee, he concentrates his attention upon the spiritual world, which revolves around the most beautiful person. In Gita himself, Krishna says, in the 10th chapter, he says, what need is there, Arjuna, for all this detailed knowledge? With a single fragment of myself, I pervade and support this entire universe. So the actual position, our position as conditioned souls, is spiritual consciousness. Our position is to remember God at all times. Right? So the next one is about the Purusha, in how Mahavishnu expands into Garbuda Vishnu, and this Vishnu, he lies on the water of the Garbha ocean, which he half fills with his own perspiration. And from his navel, a lotus stem comes and Brahma sits on it. And from Garbhodakshaya Vishnu, there's another expansion called Kshirodakshaya Vishnu, which enters into every heart. And from him, all incarnations come. Nothing can take place without a cause. So here, Prabhupada, in this section, he talks about the other theories and he refutes them. So this is a very nice opportunity for parents to talk about this to our children and really have a good, animated discussion on what these other theories are. I mean, this information about the other theories is found in many, many places. It's not difficult to find the theories of, these modern theories that scientists believe in. For example, the Big Bang, the chemical evolution, the Darwin's evolution theory, all this is, throughout the Bhagavatam, Prabhupada refutes them and talks about them. Now, in my book called Homeschooling Krishna's Children, there's a whole chapter on this, on the modern theories of the scientists and how Prabhupada it takes every one of them and refutes them. So this is a very nice way to challenge our children and to start thinking about these things and to critically think about subject matters so important as the origin of this universe. And this is the time. And I know that with children, I've interacted in this way, and they just love it. And over time, they just wait for such challenges and for such talks. So, so we're teaching a very important principle to them, is not to take everything blindly, but actually to look at everything critically with the, with an eye of discernment, so that we can see everything from the Vedic perspective. The idea is to give our children a conviction in the Vedic perspective, in Srimad Bhagavatam, in the Shastras, which are perfect because they're coming from the most perfect person. So what is this now? So Garbuda Vishnu, and then the Shastras also mention the Virat form. Now, what is this Virat form? Right? In text 3, actually, is mentioned about this universal form of the Lord. And so the Garbhodakshaya Vishnu and Karanadakshaya Vishnu, they're not material forms. They're not imaginary forms, like we say for Virat Rupa. They are transcendental forms beyond this material energy. So they are way above that. But the Virat form is considered to be an material form of the Lord, and where all the elements, the material elements, are imagined to be his body. Now, why is Krishna doing this? Is for those who are critical or who are non-believers, and for those who have no conception of God, about his Satchitananda form. Such a person, he cannot conceive. If you tell him that there is a Satchitananda form of the Lord and this is how he looks. So the way we introduce such a person is that we tell him that, look, these mountains are the bones of Krishna. The sun or moon are the eyes of Krishna. Right? The trees are the hairs of the Lord's body. In this way, he starts understanding the universe as the form of the Lord. Of course, we as devotees, we understand that beyond this, the Lord has his own spiritual form. And this material conception is actually imaginary, but it is a bona fide, because everything is the energy of the Lord. It's imaginary, but it's bona fide, because this material energy is also part of the energetic. It's also coming from the Lord. Right? So in that sense, it's one, but it's also different, because Krishna has nothing to do with this material form. So without the energetic, there's no meaning to energy. And without the energy, there's no meaning to energetic. So they are one and the same, but also they're different, and which I explained in my last class. Right? So, text 4 is a very nice text, which you can actually recite the Sanskrit with them. It's an important text where the devotees, it's saying how the devotees with their perfect eyes see the transcendental form of the Purusha, who has thousands of legs, thighs, arms, and faces, all extraordinary. In that body, there are thousands of ears, head, ears, eyes, and noses. They are all decorated with thousands of helmets and glowing earrings, and are adorned with garlands. But the next text talks about how the Garbhodakshaya Vishnu, the second manifestation of the Purusha, is the source, is actually the indestructible seed of all the multifarious incarnations within the universe. And from this Purusha, all the different entities, living entities, demigods, men, and others are created. So the Lord's body is conceived of having thousands of legs and arms and thighs, and and then Prabhupada mentions, bringing us back home to that point, that what can reveal this form? You know how Arjuna got a special divine eyes, to see this Virat Rupa. But then, of course, he wanted to see the two-handed form, because it's like going to a 3D movie and you have these special glasses, right? But how long would you want to wear these special glasses? Ultimately, you want to throw it away, right? So in the same way, Arjuna he didn't want it anymore, and he wanted to see the original beautiful form of the Lord, two-handed form of the Lord, right? So, so in that sense, this Virat Rupa is there for neophytes, who think of the Lord as formless. So in order to bring them back to, in order to bring them back to the idea that Lord has a form. This Virat Rupa is very, very necessary. And of course, to the advanced devotee, he does have a form. Right? And this form, this second form, this Garbhodakshaya Vishnu form, is actually the source of the indestructible seed. And this is where the Leela avatars are originating from. Now, the interesting point here is that a seed, generally when you plant a seed, there's only one plant that will grow out of it. But this seed, which is the Garbhodakshaya Vishnu, is endless because it keeps producing millions and millions of avatars. There's no limit. And so what's given in this chapter is just a very bare minimum. Hardly, it's like a little speck, right? So this seed is known as the indestructible seed, from which many, many plants can come out. So many incarnations are coming out from this seed. And Krishna is very consistent in coming. He consistently comes as an avatar again and again. And the reason is Krishna wants the living entities to get attracted to his avatars. And he wants the living entity to cooperate with his reclaiming program. How? By doing devotional service. So ultimately we'll come to that point that how we can cooperate with the Lord. Okay. So Garbhodakshaya Vishnu is transcendental, like I said, but the Virat form is a material made out of the material potencies. And so we can see that because as you go along in the Srimad Bhagavatam and you move on to the other cantos, you will see that how this Virat Rupa is compared to many different things, according to the different purpose behind it. For example, it's compared to to the four varnas. Like for example, it describes how the Krishna's head is the Brahmanas and his arms the Kshatriyas, the thighs the Vaishyas, and the legs the Shudras. Sometimes the Virat Rupa is compared to the 14 different planetary systems. In the second canto, the Virat Rupa is described as an object of meditation by the yogi. And in Canto 3, which is the 6th chapter, the Virat Rupa is described as the manifestation of the Lord's own desires. It will be mentioned how when the Lord desired to eat, the tongue manifested. The demigod for eating goes in and the tongue manifested. Like this, he wanted to see and the eyes manifested. And he had a desire to other desires. So in this way, all the senses were manifested of the living entities. This is how the senses came into existence. So in the next slide, we talk about the details of these incarnations. Of course, as you know, there's many, many incarnations, and we cannot, right now, we don't have the time to describe all of them. And these incarnations, this list of incarnations in this chapter, they don't appear chronologically, except the first one, which is the four Kumaras. They were the first sons of Brahma. And the mention of these incarnations are actually sprinkled throughout the Bhagavatam. Like you'll find a little bit of the four Kumaras in Canto 3, Chapter 4. This was where they actually took birth as the first sons. And they, as you may recall, they didn't want to get married. And so Brahma got very angry, and from his anger came Lord Shiva. Right? But they refused to get married because they wanted to stay brahmacharis so they don't get distracted. Right? Then in Chapter 22, the Prithu Maharaj story, Canto 4, Chapter 22, in the story of Prithu Maharaj, we hear there's a beautiful chapter of how the four Kumaras visit Prithu Maharaj, and he gives and they give instructions to Prithu Maharaj. Beautiful instructions, very meaningful. And then in the third canto, we hear about the cursing of Jaya and Vijaya. That's a story that children really enjoy to hear, the cursing of Jaya and Vijaya and how they took birth as Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha. So in this way, we find the story of Kumaras in several places. Okay, so we have other avatars, the Narad Muni avatara, which is Narad Muni wrote the Pancharatrika, right? And he explained what is fruitive activities and how to avoid it. So in other words, when we do activities for Krishna, that's the way to avoid the reaction for fruitive activities, right? And if you do it for Krishna, we don't get entangled. So beautiful. And then you'll see in this verse where they're describing that, a nice analogy which you can discuss with the children. You know how when we take too much milk, then there's an upset stomach. But if you take the way to cure the upset is to take curd, right? To take yogurt. So in the same way, material world activities, if we do it for ourselves, then that causes bondage. But the same activities done for Krishna, it causes liberation. So it's so interesting, all these incarnations, and it can become so much fun for children to go through these incarnations, step by step, because the children, it's interesting, and they can hear about the leaders of Krishna. And Radhika Mataji will take you through the guidebook where elaborately we've made activities for this section. Right? So then we have Nan Narayan Rishi. I'll just go through a very few of them. And that's interesting here because they do penances to control the senses. And it's mentioned that in the 4th canto, chapter 1. And then later on, they are recipients of the prayers by the residents of Bharatvarsh, later on in canto 5. And then in canto 11, a very interesting story of their pastimes come, where Indra gets very jealous and he sends Cupid to disturb their penance. And Krishna manifested many, many beautiful women, apsaras, which completely outdid the apsaras of Indra. And among the apsaras that Krishna created, one of it was Urvashi, that Indra took for himself, as a court dancer, in his assembly. So throughout the Bhagavatam, we hear about these different incarnations. And of course, also in the 12th canto, when he bestows benedictions on Markandeya Rishi. So in this way, we have many, many incarnations. Dattatreya is another one, who's the son of Atri and Anasuya. This is interesting because here we see how Atri, he really has no conception of who God is and what he does. And so he does severe, severe penances. And so he asks the Lord as his son, but a Lord who's the controller of this universe. So there's 3 controllers, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. And so all of them appeared. And all of the 3 partial representations appeared as his son. And Dattatreya was a partial representation of Vishnu. And so he appears as his son. So very interesting. Dattatreya will come again in the 11th canto, where he speaks to King Yadu on the 24 gurus. He's actually the one who speaks. They are his gurus. So in this way, we have, Yagya, one more Yagya incarnation, which is he's a son of Akuti, who's one of the daughters of Swambhu Manu, and Ruchi, and they had Yagya as their son and Dakshina as their daughter. Now, Dakshina was a partial representation of Lakshmi, and Yagya is an incarnation of the Lord, but they both get married. So that's an interesting thing because it shows that our eternal relationship doesn't change. And what we have as in our material relationships is actually secondary, is not really of much meaning, because our eternal relationship is what matters. So they both get married, because they are eternally Vishnu and Lakshmi. So in this way, we can go through all these interesting episodes. We can explain to them. A lot of that will be given in the guidebook, where it will be easy for you. You don't have to look through all the cantos. We've given it for you. Then we have the story of King Rishabdev and his preaching to his 100 sons. We have the story, beautiful section of Prithu Maharaj, well, almost like 9 chapters, who cultivated the land to make it very prosperous. And then we have Matsya, we have Dhanavantri, and Mohini Murti, which is a wonderful section for the children about, the churning of the ocean. There's like 3 avatars that come from this one pastime, Dhanvantri and Mohini Murti are 2 of them. Then we have the Lord Nrsimhadev avatar, then we have Vaman Dev, and Parushrama, of course, in the 9th canto. And then, of course, Vyasadeva, who divided the Vedas into 4, and he wrote Srimad Bhagavatam. And then we have Lord Rama, and then we have Balaram and Krishna, who as well. Now I will explain that why they are mentioned as among the list of incarnations when Krishna is himself the Lord. Right? And of course, Lord Buddha, very important one we could discuss because there's so many good aspects deeper aspects that come from this. Why Buddha denied the Vedas and rejected the Vedas, which is really not the nature of the Lord to reject the Vedas, but why he takes this form because of his compassion for the animals who are being killed. Right? And so we can discuss that with our children. And then Kalki, of course, is always the exciting one, which is still going to come in order to just kill all the plunderers, So in this way, we have millions and millions of avatars, and they're all, they're described as being inexhaustible. It's interesting how in verse 26 we can discuss with our children how a nice analogy. Now, don't be afraid of analogies. Always take advantage of them because it really helps the children, go understand the foundational principles of Krishna consciousness, as well as helps them to understand abstract thinking, which helps in their critical thinking and strong reasoning skills. And also it helps them to understand very difficult spiritual concepts with the help of these material examples. So in this, in text 26, verse 26, there's an example, an analogy of how this, all these incarnations are like little rivers, rivulets it's called, that's coming from a very big reservoir of water. Now, the rivulets can do not much in terms of exhausting this big reservoir of water. Ultimately, it's going to exhaust. But Krishna's reservoir is inexhaustible and is never exhausted. And all these incarnations is like these small rivulets that are not even, it's not even doing much in terms of understanding the opulence of the Lord and how Krishna, there is no limit. He's limitless. Right? So so in this way we can go through all the incarnations, all Krishna's vibhutis, and his empowered incarnations, the Shakti-Avesh avatars, all these things. So now, which is now taking us to the most important next slide, and that is how Krishna is the source of all incarnations. Very, very important verse actually they say this the most important verse in the entire Bhagavatam. This is like the essence of all the verses. Just like Srimad Bhagavatam is the essence of all the scriptures, this verse is the essence of all verses. And it's right in the first canto because it's making a point to understand how this verse is actually the basis for all other verses. In other words, all other verses in all other scriptures should actually coincide, should go along with this verse. And if it doesn't, then it should, then the other verses are not exactly giving the point. Okay, it's not exactly giving you the point. So I'm just going to read you the shloka and the translation, since it's such a wonderful shloka. Ete chamsa kala pumsa Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam Indrari Vyakulam Lokam Mridayante Yuge Yuge. All of the above mentioned incarnations are either the plenary portions or the portions of the plenary portions of the Lord. But Lord Shri Krishna is the original personality of Godhead. All of them appear on planets. Whenever there's a disturbance created by the atheists, the Lord incarnates to protect the theists. Now, going back to the 19th and 20th verse, where Krishna and Balaram are mentioned, in the verse 23, where Krishna and Balaram are mentioned as the 19th and 20th incarnation, and now he's mentioned as Swayam Bhagavan. So this becomes a little confusing. And the way it's explained is that we have to understand that the second statement is always more accurate than the first. And a nice example is that if you've prepared a wonderful feast and all the items, everybody says how wonderful, how tasty it is, but then a person who's being very honest comes and says that everything's so wonderful, but the dal had a little bit too much salt, or the rice was not very well cooked. So what does it mean? That means this statement has to be taken more seriously, because it's the but of that verse. So in other words, tu means but. So even though Krishna and Balaram have been mentioned as a list of incarnations, but actually Krishna is the Lord himself. So in other words, there's so many incarnations of Krishna, but he is actually Swayam Bhagavan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So this verse, like I mentioned, is the emperor of all verses. It is, it should be taken very seriously. And of course, the acharyas go very deeply into this verse. And Jiva Goswami has written a whole Sandarbha proving this conclusively, how Krishna is. This is called the Paribhas Sutra, how Krishna is actually the Samam Bonam, is actually the Swayam Bhagwan. He's actually the Supreme Personality of Godhead and no other. Right? So, and so we can understand through the process of parampara that there should be no ambiguity or no scope for misinterpretation of this verse. Right? In other words, all verses should align with this one verse. So why? Because then we can see that in the Srimad Bhagavatam, how the principal character is actually Krishna in the Srimad Bhagavatam. How many chapters? There are 335 chapters in this Bhagavatam, and the 121 chapters exclusively describes the pastimes of Krishna. Besides that, Krishna appears in Canto 1, right? And here and there, so many times. So Krishna's form, and Krishna is glorified as the topmost form. So I think we did lose a little bit of time, so I'm going to make a quick, of course, I mentioned in this slide how Murari, there's many stories that we can give our children in terms of proving the fact that Krishna is the Supreme Personality. He is the original personality of Godhead. And so that makes it very, very interesting for our children, so we can bring in stories. And there's many stories. We can even bring it from other scriptures, where it shows that one story is in the 10th canto, how Mahavishnu had a desire to see the Lord. And so he devised a way to get the Lord there, in Shvetadipa. So, and it's a very fascinating story of how he devised a way by, in Dwarka, where a Brahmana was living, every child of the Brahmana was being killed. And in this way, Krishna and Arjuna had to go and find these sons of Brahmana, because during the time of Ugrasena, nobody died untimely. And it was really being with Krishna's presence in the mature world, this was not welcome. So in this way, Mahavishnu found a chance to see the Lord. And of course, in Chaitanya Leela, we have many, many stories, beautiful stories of how Lord Chaitanya himself showed that the form of the Lord is the highest to Venkat Bhatt, and also to, in other Leelas, in Madhya Leela, beautiful, beautiful Leelas of how Lord Jagannath goes to Gundicha temple, and how there was a big fight between the Lakshmi, servants of Lakshmi, and servants of Lord Jagannath. Anyway, so these stories, you can find these stories in different scriptures, and you can tell your children how, and children that you're teaching, that how there is no doubt that Krishna is the supreme, is the original personality of Godhead, and from him come all the expansions and avatars. So the next slide is talking about the Virata Rupa. It brings back this point again, where that Virata Rupa is actually the manifested from the external energy of the Lord, and it's actually in this section from, I think it's text 30 to 30. I think a few verses, it talks about how it's comparing the Virata Rupa of the Lord to being his material body to the material body of the Jiva, how we have a material body, but we also, our real constitution is that we have a spiritual body. In the same way, the Virata Rupa is the material manifestation of the Lord, but actually Krishna is transcendental, is actually transcendental. And just like our form stays for 100 years maximum, and our form can have so many hands and legs, depending on whether we have an animal body or human body. In the same way, the manifestation of Virat Rupa also can have thousands and thousands of legs. Okay, and then there's a beautiful analogy in verse 31 that you can discuss with the children, the analogy of the sky and the wind. Very interesting, very easy to follow, that you can follow with the children. And so, so it elaborately discusses a lot of points here, which is very interesting, where, it talks about, and then in text 36, actually in verse 36, it talks about the external, the personal form of the Lord, what is actually, it always brings home the point, where, okay, we've discussed all this, the material form of the Lord, and it's an imaginary form, and who it is meant for, the purpose of creation, but then it brings us home to the real point, and that is, what is the external personal form of the Lord? What is that? And who's and so that is the Lord who is full of six opulences, and he is not affected by this process of creation, maintenance, destruction, and he is independent, and he's the master of all the six opulences. And then it talks about which are the types of people who cannot understand the form of the Lord, and which are the people who can appreciate it. Of course, the mental speculators and the fruitive workers, they cannot understand who Krishna is. Then the next slide, text 38, is a very important verse, which again brings us to the real crux of the whole thing, of this whole chapter, is that who are the people who can know the Lord in his full glory, in his full glory, and in his full opulence. And the translation says, only those who render unreserved, uninterrupted, and favorable service unto the Lord, lotus feet of the Lord, who carries the wheel of the chariot in his hand, can know the creator of the universe in his full glory, power, and transcendence. Again, it brings home to the real point that devotees who do devotional service, but in which way? The devotional service which is uninterrupted, unmotivated, and these are the 2 points we did cover in the last chapter, and also favorable service. In other words, the service attitude is very important. It's very important. In what mood do we do? It's not the service itself that's as important as the mood, And again, you can bring points, you can bring stories from scriptures, to bring home that point of favorable devotional service, And one story that I was thinking about is the story in Chaitanya Charitamrita, of two personalities, Bahulasva and Shrutadeva. Bahulasva was a great king. Shrutadeva was a very poor man. And both had invited the Lord to come and visit him with all the sages, Vyasadeva and all that, to eat in their homes. And Krishna expanded himself into two, and so did the sages, and they both went in both the homes. And one had a welcome which was like a king's welcome. Shrutadeva was very, very poor, and his welcome was very simple, and how Krishna appreciated everything. So in other words, it's not the service, but the mood in which we serve. Okay, so this is an interesting story that you can connect with, and you can always think of other stories. If you read, like 10th Krishna book, there's so many stories like that, and this is one book that children would have covered. So the slide is about the last question, which was, what was this question? Where did dharma? This answered in this section, which is starts from verse 40. Where did dharma take birth after Krishna left the planet? The people who had lost their vision in the misdirected civilization of Kali Yuga, where did dharma come after Krishna left? So here, as we can expect, the glories of Srimad Bhagavatam is explained, because this is the incarnation of Krishna that came after Krishna left the planet, and it describes Bhagavatam, as we know, describes all the activities of Krishna, and which helps us to understand who Krishna is, because Bhagavatam and Krishna are non-different. So therefore, we should study it very carefully, ourselves and with our children. And we should understand that because Bhagavatam incarnated as, Krishna incarnated as Bhagavatam, when we read Bhagavatam, we're actually spending time with Krishna. Now, the last slide, which is, it covers an important point, which is verse 44, is that what are the two things that qualified Sutha Goswami to recite Bhagavatam, and one was that he heard Bhagavatam with rapt attention, and the second was that he, due to his hearing with rapt attention, he invoked the mercy of Shukadeva Goswami. And as you remember in the last chapter, we talked about how he was praying for Shukadeva Goswami to enter his heart and help him to actually speak Bhagavatam. Just like he entered the dulse trees, he wanted Shukadeva Goswami to enter the heart. So that's the mercy aspect, by hearing, when we hear with rapt attention. Of course, rapt attention, a person who's completely free from material desires can hear with complete rapt attention. So we are working on that process, right? We're working on the process. But however, whatever level we may be at, whatever we hear is going to benefit, and we can speak that. What we hear, we speak. And speaking can come in so many different ways, preaching to our children, studying with our children, or it can come in other ways to other devotees. So whatever level we may be on, we just simply give to that level. It doesn't have to be the purest level like Sutha Goswami was on, but it can be at any level. And Prabhupada explains that with an example how different birds can fly at different heights. There are some birds who can actually go very close to the sun, which is very fascinating for children to know. So anyway, try to pick out different things from the Bhagavatam, which brings us a type of fascination for our children, where they can actually start dreaming of how beautiful this, Krishna is, and how wonderful his Srimad Bhagavatam is, and they develop an attraction to this. Okay, so I will stop here. Thank you for listening, and I will give it over to Shri Radhika Mataji to elaborate on the guidebook.
Thank you, Mataji. Very nice overview. Okay, I'm just going to share my screen. Give me a few seconds. All right, so hopefully we have, hopefully we've taken the time to read Prabhupada's purports, before we go to discuss with our children. And then into the discussion, we're able to bring all these points that Mataji spoke about, discussing chapter 3 from Canto 1. And then once we have read Prabhupada's books, Prabhupada's Bhagavatam with our child or children, then we're ready to move on to Srimad Bhagavatam, a comprehensive guide for young readers. So my part will be to share how I have taught from this particular chapter, and see if perhaps you can find some resources that are useful. So every chapter in the book begins with a child-friendly summary of the chapter, because sometimes it's tough for the child to get this flow of the story, perhaps from reading the translations directly from the Bhagavatam. So this is a really nice format that these story summaries are presented in, where there's dialogue. So for instance, Sutha Goswami continued to speak to the sages. One day he began, in the spiritual world, which is far, far away from here, Lord Krishna did something very spectacular. He expanded himself into another person. So, it's really nice to be able to read a story summary that's written like this, for children. And the author that wrote this for Mataji in her book, Vrinda Kishori Devdasi from UK, she has these audiobooks, and I can send out the link in the YouTube as well as the Zoom call, but we can hear a little bit.
And then he said, also, Archanam, worshipping the deity of Krishna. Let's bring our hands out as if we're offering a lovely arti to Krishna. And then he said, Vandanam, offering prayers. That pleases Krishna. Let's bring our hands together as a prayer. Good girl. And then Dasyam, being Krishna's servant. Let's be Krishna's servant and bow our heads. And Sakyam, let's be his friend. Oh, let's give a nice cuddle. And then he also said, do you know what else he said? The last thing was Atma Nivedanam. That's fully.
So we'll pause there. Just wanted to give you a little sampler. And these are available on SoundCloud, so you're welcome to access it. And I wanted to show you a picture from my Sunday school where, you know, not only do we just read the story summary, but we kind of act it out. So in the story summary, it talks of how Lord Brahma was born from the navel. And for some reason, I guess I didn't have 4 kids to put their heads together. So I have a 3-headed Lord Brahma here, but that's the best we did in class. So there's an idea for you to, you know, act out the story summaries. And then every chapter has key messages where verses are grouped together to identify the message or the theme in those set of verses. And particularly helpful as an adult reading the Bhagavatam myself. The related verses that'll be given in the chapters are not always directly from that chapter. So text 28 is from here, Ete Chamsa Kala Pumsa, you know, very, very important verse for children to memorize. But there's also Bhagavad-Gita 4.7, Yada Yada Hi Dharmasya, that's very much related to the message of the chapter. And these 2 verses have been suggested as verses that a child can memorize related to chapter 3. So we've done this at home and in our Sunday school. And I really like the multiple choice as well as the essay questions that are given in understanding the story. And the answers for the multiple choice are at the end. And it's a really nice way to see if children are absorbing the message that is provided in the chapter. And I had a very special visitor for my Sunday school. So I wanted to show these pictures. This was when we were covering chapter 3. And Arudha Mataji happened to be in town visiting Chicago. So she was teaching children directly from this chapter. I really like the higher thinking questions that are given for every chapter as well, because you know, sometimes I'll just take a note with pencil in the Bhagavatam itself of the higher thinking question related to a particular verse or a particular set of verses, and it really helps me find discussion points when I'm discussing the chapter with children. Or I sometimes post this on a Google Classroom, or I give it as a writing assignment to my children. So they're learning grammar and writing from the Bhagavatam. This is a really fun activity. So, you know, understanding this whole concept of how bubbles come out of the body of Maha Vishnu. Here's my son, and this is pretty recent. You can see he's got a mask. It's in a group that we were, a homeschool co-op that we're part of. So we did this activity. Not so much in relation to this chapter, but to understand the concept of how expansions come from Mahavishnu. And here's my son blowing a lot of bubbles. So the activity that's suggested is to take a bowl and put some water and soap, and then we took a straw and we blew some bubbles into the water. And then everyone runs around Mahavishnu, from whose pores these universes are coming. And everybody was saying, Jai, Jai, Mahavishnu, and, you know, popping the universes and looking for the biggest bubbles. So this was a real fun activity. We went outside our Sunday school for this one, churning tug of war. So the demigods and the demons, they're churning the milk ocean. And there's also a suggestion, which we didn't do, which is, you know, the demigods can dress nicely and the demons can be dressed with mustaches and, you know, looking evil. but they can have a tug of war. So it makes the chapter really fun. Creation mobile. So this is an activity where there's a resource at the end in the book, or at the end of the chapter, of Maha Vishnu lying down, and the universe is coming from the pores of his skin. And the children can color this. So you make a photocopy of resource one, and children color it in, and then they cut out Mahavishnu, and they cut out the bubbles, and then they hang them to make a mobile. So here you can see in my Sunday school the same image, the same picture. They're coloring it in right here very clearly. You can see how they're coloring this in, and then we went ahead and did the mobile. This is a very fun activity that's in the book, Incarnation Poster. So assigning a particular incarnation, or the child picking a particular incarnation that inspires them, and then doing research. And there is a really nice resource too at the end of this chapter. I only included one page here, but it's several pages long, and it has information about all the incarnations that I mentioned in this chapter. So the child can read through this, or they can go to the Bhagavatam or other places and do research on a particular incarnation, and then create a poster. So the way I did in my Sunday school, and I forgot to take pictures, this was in the St. Louis Sunday School, where 2 or 1 or 3 children were assigned a particular incarnation. So one of my sons was assigned Lord Rama, and another one Lord Narasimha. So you can see their posters here. And then they create a poster, and they have a picture in the middle, and then they have some facts, some information about the incarnations written, and then they've decorated their posters. So we actually did a little exhibition, and we invited all the parents in at the end of one class, and all the 10, or all the, I can't remember how many boards were there, but all the boards were on display, and the parents walked around, and it was a really fun exhibition that we did from this chapter. There are other suggestions of creating a quiz based on the incarnations. Mataji mentioned about debate, and how that's a really good medium for strengthening children's conviction in the process that they're following. So here's an avatar debate. Some people claim to be an incarnation, and how can you prove that someone is or isn't an incarnation of the Lord? So you set up a debate with a fictional God, and both sides have to do some research, and then go for it. So we do this often, and we also do it often in our daily Bhagavatam reading, where we'll have debates. So we did this one, and then also the avatar memory game is listed in this chapter, where we say, when Lord Krishna incarnated, he came as Matsya. The other child has to say, when Lord Krishna incarnated, he came as Matsya Kurma. And the next child has to say, when Lord Krishna incarnated, he came as Matsya Kurma Varaha. So they add on. Incarnation jumble is a very nice exercise related to resource 3 given in this chapter, where you choose a particular color, and then you color in the words that are related to a particular incarnation. So for instance, Hiranyaksha could be orange, and tusks would be orange, and boar would be orange, and earth would be orange, because it's all related to the boar incarnation. And then you could choose yellow for Lord Rama, and all these words related to Lord Rama, like Ravan, Kumbhakarna, Shrupanaka, Hanuman, Sita, would be in yellow. So the children really enjoyed this one. Other activities, one I want to bring to your attention here is, wow, can you believe that Srimad Bhagavatam is actually an incarnation of the Lord himself? So write down a list of ways that you can worship Srimad Bhagavatam, and make sure they're practical ideas, and then put them in order of priority, and then go ahead and execute it. So when we did this at home, my children chose, well, if Srimad Bhagavatam is an incarnation of Krishna, then we want to do Aarti. So here are my children. This is when we used to live in St. Louis, and they were younger. So they were inspired by this activity to, they created this table, took one of my saris and decorated it and put the Bhagavatam there, and they did Aarti. So it very much brings the chapter to life. It brings the felt experience into their body of, we did Aarti, this is Krishna. So I really like the suggestions that are given in this chapter. Other writing exercises. This is a very nice one that we did, where you pick an incarnation of your choice and you write a full story of their appearance in your own words. So again, teaching English through the Bhagavatam, using adjectives like beautiful, young, strong, intelligent, which are Krishna's qualities, in a sentence of their own. Here's an incarnation word jumble, and you can see this is my older son that did this activity in his book. Keywords, and we've gone through this for chapter 1 and 2 as well, where the child goes to a dictionary and then looks up the word and has to, and that way builds on his grammar through reading chapter 3 of Srimad Bhagavatam. A cryptogram, and here's the solution from one of my children. And we really liked this one, Avatar Charade. So we did this in Sunday school, and I had all these chits put in a bag, and then one child from one team comes and picks it up, and they have to act it out for their team. And if they're able to act it out for their team, they get the point. I don't think we did this drama in my particular Sunday school, but again, I pick and choose activities. I don't do everything from the guidebook for every chapter, but it gives me a very good variety and gives me options to pick for different ages as well. This is a really sweet song. So there are, usually poems or songs in every chapter. My name is Maha Vishnu. I'm lying down in the Karna ocean with disc and crown, lotus conch and golden mace, sleeping soundly in outer space. So I don't have any particular tune. It's just, you can set it to any tune that you like. But we really enjoyed these songs. And these songs, just like Bhaktivinoda Thakur took very deep philosophy and he converted it into songs for village people to understand the philosophy. So I find the poems that are given in the book really help my children understand the philosophy just by singing and dancing to it. And here's a really nice Avatar song. And Sri Yashoda Devidasi from Australia, I can send you the link again. This is on SoundCloud, has this song on SoundCloud.
Who's that swimming in the water with a long horn pulling a little boat? Who's that swimming in the water? Who came to keep the Vedas afloat? Who came to keep the Vedas afloat? Matya! Hari Hari Bo! Keshavadrita Meena Shari.
So you can look for, again, her name is Sri Yashoda Devidasi, and she has this song and others on her SoundCloud channel. And this song is really nice refrain where you can learn all the incarnations. So I'm going to show you a video from my Sunday school where the children are learning this song. So it made it really fun, to learn the incarnations. Here's another video. So really, really cute. I really enjoyed this chapter. And there are answers at the back of the book. Here's how you can get them in the USA, as well as I had a question, Mataji, that was raised about UK, and I do believe they're available on Amazon UK, and you can correct me. Is that correct, Mataji?
Yes, they are available on Amazon UK.
Perfect. So somebody just asked it in the Zoom, and you can get these books on Amazon UK or in India, as well as I know in the Middle East and in that region, you can order them through Golden Age Media. And we have the customer service number here. I can send it in the chat, as well as we have a form for you to fill out to get a discount. So we'll leave 20 minutes for questions. And we have one from Atulya Mataji in Boston. How do I bulk order these books for the USA?
For the USA, well, if you I can get a little bit of discount for anybody who's doing bulk order by just going through they offer a discount for author's discount is called, which can kind of reduce the price to maybe $1 per book, like that. So if you have a bulk order, get in touch with me because it will save you some money if you like to do that. I can help out with that in the USA. Yeah.
Okay. Archana Mataji would like to unmute herself and ask a question.
Hare Krishna, Mataji. Thank you so much for this chapter description. So Mataji, my question is when the kids are very young, and when we are new to Krishna consciousness, and when we have not, as a parent, if I myself have not developed that extremely firm conviction that, okay, Krishna is the Supreme Lord, and how do we actually describe all of this to the kids? So the reason why I ask is, although we've been trying to follow Krishna consciousness for quite some time. When we went to India, my parents are very strong devotees of Satya Sai Baba and other incarnations. So how do we actually bring that into limelight and then develop that, develop our faith from the shaky thing to the firm conviction, and in the process also give the right perspective to our children?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Very good questions. Very nice questions. And so in terms of you, the parent not knowing enough about Srimad Bhagavatam, since you may not have actually read it before you actually need to teach it to them, well, that's not a problem because you can just learn with them as you go along, as you do the chapter with them. You can learn with them. If you have a little bit of time before you do the reading with them and discussion with them, it would be nice to go over the chapter yourself. And the whole purpose of these programs is to actually help you in both areas, where you can actually understand it yourself, and some is already it's given already to you. That may save a lot of time, and then as you're reading it, you can note the points that you may think would be very interesting for the child. You could probably spend about an hour reviewing the chapter. If you don't have so much time, spend a half hour. And if you still don't have the time, then I would just read it with them, because even then you will learn a lot and you will be able to teach them. This was pretty much how my life was. I was very busy with helping out with running a preaching center, and there was so much to do, and many times I couldn't look over the chapter, but it was still very, very valuable, and I learned it along with the children. As they learned, I learned. As they spiritually grew, I spiritually grew. However, there's a big difference, because being adults, we have so much experience in life, and we will always be their teachers and share that experience that they don't have. So that hopefully that answers, and you can take the plunge without getting worried about that. Now, the second point that you raised was about, how to, your parents not following Sai Baba. again, because you have the children, I'm assuming you're in America and you have access to your children every day of your life. By teaching them Bhagavatam every day, you would have developed a very strong foundation, and given them a conviction about Krishna and who he is, and that will stay with them even when they actually go to India. It really doesn't. It is not shaken. If you've given them on a day-to-day basis, or even on a weekly basis, that will hold throughout even in the journey to other. And in fact, they become quite good at sharing, convincing others, their grandparents, and they can do it in such an innocent way that actually does have an impact sometimes on grandparents. So in order to give them this this vision of how there's so many people out there who follow different paths, that is important also while we teach Bhagavatam to our children, to show them that actually there's a lot of types of people and they have different types of faith. And through the Bhagavatam discussion, these points will come up very, very easily and quickly, because Prabhupada makes that point how, different scriptures are for different people in different modes of nature, and how Bhagavatam is really the ripened fruit of the Vedic tree. So in this way, they understand that yes, there will be people who don't follow this path, but lesser paths, but that they are meant to be respected. However, we don't need to follow or imitate them. So there's a big difference there. And children don't have a problem understanding this. They get that point, that the world is full of different types of people and how everybody is respected and accommodated. But at the same time, we need to hone on, pin that point, make that point that, and give them the conviction that Srimad Bhagavatam is the best scripture, and Krishna is the Supreme Lord. Okay.
Thank you. I'm going to call on my dear friend Champaklata Sakhi Mataji from Atlanta. Please ask your question.
Hare Krishna Mataji, thank you so much for a wonderful class. It's very, very, very beneficial. Mataji, I have a question. We finished first canto long time back. We are on second canto, but Garima is not interested in second canto at all. Like, she's not looking forward for second canto, even though lately I'm skipping the purports. But we finished first 5 chapters. Mm-hmm. So what would you suggest me? She's like, there's no stories, and I just want to jump on next canto and go with the stories.
Yeah. So the best thing would be to go really quickly through it. And not try to skip it. And the way is to take advantage of the guidebook, because the guidebook will help to make it very interesting, especially in these sections of the Bhagavatam where it becomes very philosophical and it's hard for them to actually go through the translations. And, I still would read the translations with them, but if it's becoming very, very difficult, at least cover the topic through help by reading the summary from the guidebook, before you go on to the third canto. And in third canto, there's many stories, as the story of Jay and Vijay being cursed by the sages. So try that and see if you can do that. Otherwise, you can go and just move on to a story. I mean, this is not anything wrong in per se doing that. If it's becoming quite impossible, it's okay. So,
yeah, I would like to share that somehow the guidebook of second canto really broke through that barrier for my kids too. I found that it was hard, but we still stuck to the translations of Canto 2. But when we went to the guidebook, it was a whole new ballgame. Somehow the guidebook really brought it down to a kid's level, made it a lot of fun. And even with third canto, because we're doing third canto right now, there are parts of third canto that are very philosophical, but the guidebook does a really good job. Question from Supriya Mataji. How can we motivate... okay, I'm sorry. So I've seen that children are enthusiastic in class. So it seems like the question is related to using the guidebooks, but they don't turn in homework. As a teacher, what can we do?
Okay, yeah. So that is in terms of, you mean using the guidebook, sometimes they have questions and you need to answer them. Well, I would do it right. And Radhika Mata, you can add on to that. I would do it right on the spot rather than giving them homework to take home. Sometimes they may, if it's not easy enough, they can do it at home. But it just may be more, easier just to do it during that time that you're covering the chapter and allow them to not carry too much homework. But Radhika, do you have anything to say on that?
Yeah, it's true that, if you're assigning as a Sunday school teacher some work from the guidebook, it's not going to get done. But if you give fun activities from the guidebook, so like the cryptogram from chapter 3, or if you give the unjumbling the words, then very likely that'll be done. So, the heavy duty stuff I cover in class, and fun stuff I sometimes assign as a homework, and then always remind, like I have WhatsApp groups for parents for Sunday school, and I remind them that, here's the homework. And I'm pretty serious about, that you need to come back with that unjumbled words. So it does happen. Question from Amritanam Mataji. Do you have any guidebook which has only stories compiled from Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad-Gita?
No, we don't have that guidebook. The whole idea is to help the children study Bhagavatam systematically. That was the whole purpose behind this project, is to not have the children being left behind, and how they can also take advantage of studying Srimad Bhagavatam systematically, but in a fun way.
Question from Sapna Mataji. Due to the age difference between my two children, and since I'm only practicing Krishna consciousness for the past 7 years, my older child enjoys doing the activities that my daughter likes and are not his age appropriate activities like research and higher thinking questions, etc. Is this still okay for me to continue doing what he likes?
Radhika, you can answer that.
Yeah, so, Srimad Bhagavatam is for all ages. So, I'm almost 40 and, my 7-year-old seems to enjoy the same stuff that I do. So I would say it's honey and it's sugar and it's sweet, and any activity that your child is enjoying, encourage it. You want to encourage them rather than our stereotypical ways of thinking, particularly fed from Common Core or from school system of what is standard for this age, because I'm a homeschooling mom, and in homeschooling, it's not about what's standard for this age. It's just going with the learning that the child is enjoying. So I would say go for it. Let the older child do what he enjoys doing or she enjoys doing from the guidebook. Even maybe it's not, exactly what would be recommended for his age, perhaps by a school system or by the Common Core standards. Anything you wanted to add to that, Mataji?
Yeah, I would do this, say the same thing. Really, you could try both ways. In other words, you could try them to do the same. Well, the whole idea behind these guidebooks is not a parent or teacher can actually adapt it according to the children. In other words, you can make something easier or more difficult. So we should try to have the children do. It's just easier for the teacher or parent to do the same thing rather than at 2 different levels, because it saves a lot of time for the parent. So I would just adjust the activity according to their level and still have them do it together. Yeah.
Okay. Question from Sapna Mataji. Due to their academic and other commitments, we're going slow, as once a week we read purports and throughout the week we do activities. Is that a good pace?
Yes, I think if you're taking a week to finish one chapter, that's about approximately, that is what is recommended to do a good job with that chapter. So, you mentioned about purports. Is to read all the purports with the children may be a little difficult. So that's why my suggestion was to not have them read purports, but only translations. But you can read the purports and at least if you can read all of them, that would be very nice. And then bring to them the different points that's mentioned in the purpose, not in all the purpose, just the purpose that you think would be very nice for discussion. So this, it doesn't become so burdensome for the children when we have them read only translations. I would definitely not spend too much time on one chapter, because that I've noticed over the years that becomes a little discouraging. Even when we do online classes, we always cover a chapter, a day. Within that 1 hour, we cover that one chapter. And of course, activities are very difficult to do online, but they can do it very, very soon. When the COVID ends, you will be able to do that.
So we have another question about the pace. So this particular teacher is doing weekly an hour-long class and is wondering if Canto 1 can be finished in 6 months. Or how to have a vision of covering all the cantos at this pace.
Well, depends how fast. It depends on how the children are reacting to it. If things seem very good the way you're doing it, then I would definitely move with that, because a chapter a week seems very reasonable. And we should not be in a rush to try to finish also, but we should not be very slow either. So it's a nice balance of both would be very helpful. If you're doing, it depends on how many times a week you're doing. That's another thing, if you're doing every day, then you could, if you're doing only discussion, then you could do a chapter a day. But if you're doing many, many activities within the guidebook, so naturally that will take longer. So Radhika, do you want to add anything to that?
So with my Sunday school, I go at the pace of 1 chapter a month, because we do Prabhupada's book and we do the guidebooks, and we only have about 4 or 5 Sundays, which is about 4 or 5 hours. And, we've just been focusing on enjoying the Bhagavatam rather than keeping up a certain pace. And at home, because we do an hour every day, we do 1 chapter in a week. So we do Prabhupada's book on day 1 or day 1 and 2, and then the rest of the week we do the guidebook. And still I'm only on Canto 3, chapter 23 at home for some reason, although I've been homeschooling for 10 years now. I think we just really, really enjoy the activities, the crafts, the songs, and the puzzles, and we're just taking it slow. But that's my personal experience.
Again, it's according to you, how you want to do it. It needs to be very, very flexible, how you want to go about it. If you feel like you want to go faster and do, fewer activities because you feel like your child has already, understood the chapter well and understood the essence, then it's really the choice is up to you, how you want to do this. The idea is that, before the child goes to college, the point is that you will be able to teach him until he's in college, hopefully, Of course, high school becomes very hectic for some children, but it's nice to carry on the study of Bhagavatam until they leave home.
And perhaps this will be our last question from Achintya Priya Mataji. You were mentioning the last session that the Bhagavatam is taught in layers and that we read it more than once. Did I understand that correctly? Yes. And also, if you have this information, how much does the Bhagavatam take to read if we cover 1 chapter per week?
Okay, so yes, in terms of Bhagavatam being taught in layers, definitely, because right now they are trying to grasp the subject matter according to a child's brain. And as they get older, the same subject matter will be at a different maturity level. It's natural. So that's why we cannot give our children everything that an adult would get from from the Bhagavatam. In this way, it's always in layers. However, as we do the discussion with them and do the activities with them, their capacity to understand becomes deeper and deeper and deeper. And it's amazing the change that happens, something that they would not have understood before you began reading Bhagavatam. They have a sudden very deep maturity. Like Prabhupada said, through the Bhagavatam, you can understand every psychological situation in the world. And because Bhagavatam is talking about just about every, type of problem that a person can face emotionally, and psychologically, it's all related in the Bhagavatam. So the child matures in a way that normal children actually are behind in that. But this maturity is actually very, very beneficial for them. We should not misunderstand this maturity. It's a maturity of, just like Prahlad, like Dhruva and Prahlad. They were children, but their maturity was so wonderful, So that kind of maturity is very nice.
All right, at 9 o'clock, Mataji, did you have any closing comments?
Thank you all for joining in every week. And I know a lot of you are hearing these sessions afterwards because of the timing. But yes, thank you for allowing us to share this knowledge, beautiful knowledge from Bhagavatam. So we'll see you again with chapter 4. Thank you.
Hare Krishna, next Saturday. Thank you for joining.